You talk to guys that have been in this position before, they'll tell you that some of the biggest mistakes in transactions are made at the trading deadline and July 1st.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
All right. So, and again, I already pointed out Washington did nothing, almost nothing at the trade deadline last year as part of their formula for their retool. So I'm just putting it out there, food for thought, that you can make a lot of mistakes at the trade deadline because you feel like you got to be involved when maybe you don't have to be. Right. And if you force a deal or you start dealing with players that are injured, and I say these guys have lost value because players like Trent Frederic or Brad Marchand, if you want to talk about those two guys in particular, because they have value, they would be going to teams that think they can win the Stanley Cup, and they're going to help them win the Stanley Cup this year. Well, they're injured. They're injured. And will they be back before the end of the regular season, Or are you rolling the dice that say, okay, they'll be playoff players for us because they'll be healthy and ready to go there? Whatever the theory is, whatever the thought process is, and it just makes for interesting conversation because of the health situation of those two players in particular. But, again, really curious to see how active Boston will or won't be in and around Friday's deadline.
Yeah, and you wonder, too, as a ripple effect, does it make some of the other players more valuable, right? Because those players are injured. Is a Morgan Geekie now more valuable at the trade deadline? Because, again, you take a couple of players off the board, in particular, Brad Marchand, who's all, the captain and just all world. If you're looking for, again, different positions, left wing, right wing, I understand all that, but just in terms of goal scoring and production, somebody who can help you if you're a team that thinks that you can make a run at the Stanley Cup, and Brad Marchand's off the board, you're looking more closely at a Morgan Geekie, for example, right?
Yeah, and I think, obviously we're not in the room, but
no.
and never have been for that matter, but
you've been closer than I have, Rick.
you can identify Morgan Geekie, just for example.
Yeah.
This is a guy we want. We want to keep him.
Right.
We like what we've seen, particularly the second half of this year. We like what he did last year. We like his growth. We like where his career's headed. We like him as a teammate. We like him, as part of our culture. All of that stuff.
Right.
So you've identified him as a guy you want to keep, and then somebody wows you with an offer at the trade deadline.
Yeah.
So to your point, his value does change in the absence of other players unavailable. And even though you've identified him as a guy you want to keep moving forward, and then you're like, whoa, wait a second here. Here comes a deal we didn't anticipate. It, could potentially help us in every aspect of what we're trying to build here in our reset. Now you got to consider it.
Yep. You've been there before, Brick, right?
Well, I've never traded.
No, I understand
that, but
you've
certainly been traded.
You've been
gone on a waiver draft. Yeah, I've moved around a little.
But you've been in the room as the trade deadline approaches, right?
Oh, yeah.
You understand,
of course.
right?
Of course, yeah.
So take me inside the room, for any team really, but for a team that knows that, there's going to be some changes, right? What is it like? How does that impact the room? How does it impact play on the ice? Is it a distraction? Are some guys better than others in terms of blocking out the noise? And I know you played at a different time. There's no social media, right? That makes it a lot easier
what are you
for
saying?
Players, not only for the players, Brick, but for their friends and their significant others, right? They're the ones who are looking and letting these guys know what people are saying.
Yeah, there's so many variables to answer that question, and it's case by case, it's team by team, it's culture by culture. I was on a number of teams earlier in my career that were non-playoff teams. I played for a bad Pittsburgh team. I played for a bad New Jersey team. The culture wasn't strong. It wasn't good. There was finger pointing. There was so much competition for jobs and ice time that we weren't a cohesive group because we didn't have the necessary leadership. We lacked so many things as an organization, early in the stages of, those organizations trying to figure it out. We had ownership issues in Pittsburgh. Were we even going to survive? A trade deadline was like nothing to us. If a guy got traded, hey, so be it. Maybe you're going to a better place, get a better opportunity, get a better culture. So, you had some of that atmosphere with those two teams. My last year in Jersey, it started to change. Lou Lamoriello came in. They established leadership. They established, what it takes to be a New Jersey Devil. That's when it started to change. And in the long run, they ended up winning, 3 Stanley Cups? Yeah. It was the beginning of something that you want as an organization. So I got a little taste of that before I came to Boston. So a trading deadline in and around those times was more about not so much, acquisitions. We weren't good enough to add to make a playoff run. I think about that last year in Jersey. Our trade deadline was getting Sean Burke from the Canadian Olympic team. Like, that was our addition. It wasn't so much through the trade deadline that helped us qualify for the postseason. But then I came to Boston, and it was totally different. Established franchise, really good team, had gone to the final the year before, a nucleus, a culture, leadership, things were done the right way. They were established. They were one of the best teams in the National Hockey League. They had a great reputation for the strength in the room. They had great leadership in Ray Bork and Cam Neely, etc. There were plenty of leaders in that room. So the trade deadline for those groups was more about, what do we need? Yeah. What do we need? And there were only a handful of players that were bubble players, that were potential guys going, or role players where you had an abundance of those types of role players. So maybe there was some unease for those kinds of guys. But I think it was more about, we have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. That was my feeling every year I played in Boston. We have a chance to win the Stanley Cup, and what can we add at the deadline? Not so much subtract. And I think the players were all on board, even if it affected them individually, as far as opportunity and ice time and responsibility. I think everybody was willing to say, yeah, if we can add, what we need, what we might be lacking, or what we need a little bit more depth in, then we were all on board.
Yeah, and you develop friendships, obviously, right? And so it is hard to see some guys get traded. But at the end of the day, you have a goal in mind. You want to win the cup, and if you believe that you can, and if you believe in the group, you welcome an investment in the team. And that gives you a little bump too, right? Yeah. Because now you know that there's belief up above, right? That the front office believes in your group. They're willing to make that investment. But in terms of the Bruins and this year's trade deadline, it's going to be a little bit different, we think, right? The path they're taking. And it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts some of the guys who have been here for a long time, who know that this year is not necessarily in the cards. But I will say this. I mean, I think, to your point about the Bruins organization and the culture and the history, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of faith in that room as well, that there'll be an investment in the offseason.
And I don't mean to diminish, the human factor here.
Cold SOB.
No. I'm saying, if you have the culture in the room, and you have the leadership, and everybody believes you have a legitimate chance to have a long run in the postseason, you don't dwell on a trade deadline. You don't go home and say, am I here or am I not here? It just doesn't happen. You don't think that way. Mm-hmm. You don't allow yourself to think that way, and you don't expect to be moved, regardless of the year that you're having or what's being said in the media or in social media. You just kind of block out the noise and be part of the group. And then when it does happen, if you are one of those people involved in the organization's attempt to be better or obtain what you need going into the postseason, that's the human element that I'm talking about. Yeah. That's the bad part of the business. Uh-huh. The uncomfortable, or the loss of a good friend and the loss of a good teammate. And that's always difficult, but it doesn't linger. It doesn't last. It's right back to business, day one after the trade deadline, day two after the trade deadline. You move on. And that's just the nature. That's what you sign up for. That's always a possibility, no matter who you are. And I think players understand that. They deal with it, and they know how to deal with it. It's the players that don't have that mental toughness to understand that, if it happens, it happens, and, it's not going to derail me. That's what you have to have, the belief in yourself and the value that you have no matter what organization you're playing.
Yeah, I think players have a good understanding of that, right? And you talk to guys, and they get it. I think it's the fans who probably have the toughest time, right? Because they develop
and I'm hearing Rantanen's name, okay? Yeah. It seems to be a big topic of discussion, and I know there's a lot of factors there too, he's a UFA. Yeah, right. He gets traded as a UFA. There's, there's no deal in place when he goes to Carolina. He's, apparently he's turning down offers from Tom Dundon. Does he want to be part of the, Carolina franchise moving forward? Or can he be traded again, flipped again before the deadline? And I'm saying, and they're saying, well, he's not playing he's not playing with McKinnon, he's not playing with Makar. It's not like they don't have good players in Carolina, but they don't have those two players. So the analytic numbers are going to be off a little bit based on what he was doing in Colorado. Mm-hmm. But the idea was to get him because he's a postseason performer, and that's been an issue for Carolina. They don't have that guy in the postseason that can deliver at big times, big moments. But, don't say he can't play in Carolina because he's not mentally tough enough. I'm not buying that argument, to your point, saying these hockey players are pretty thick-skinned when it comes to this part of the business.